So we've got a lot of ground to cover, but I think that sort of segues nicely into Dr. Warren Mabee's presentation. So, Warren, if you...
Excuse me. Okay, so good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for coming out, and thanks very much to the both groups for inviting me to come tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. Is that working? So I'm a professor of geography at Queen's University. I do a lot of energy work and I do a lot of policy work. And one of the things that I've been deeply involved in is how communities are responding to some of the challenges of climate change, of changing energy systems, changing lifestyles. There's a lot of change going on right now, and how communities are responding is really interesting. I'm going to give you a little window into that, and hopefully that will open up some questions as we get into the more public part of the discussion. So, first thing I want to say is that there are a lot of different ways that cities are responding to the threats of climate change. You've probably heard that there are cities in Canada that are declaring or considering declaring climate emergencies. Halifax and Vancouver are two of them, but there are others that are now joining this list. Now, what does that mean? I suppose not all that much. They've declared the emergency, now what? But at least that's a symbolic action that the city recognizes the challenge and recognizes that something must be done. Cities are putting together a whole lot of different kinds of climate plans. And so Ottawa has a plan, Kingston, where I live, has a plan, Toronto has a plan. Most communities across the country have some kind of plan in place. What's in those plans, the quality of those plans varies drastically from spot to spot. I've read a lot of them. Some of them I've really enjoyed, and some of them I wonder, why did they spend so much time putting this together when they could have just downloaded something off the internet? A climate plan is often really just a collection of ideas, and those ideas are fleshed out better in other plans that the cities are putting together, which actually have a little bit more meat on the bone. So almost every city has a transportation plan, a master transportation plan, and it will include things like, where do we need to build a new street? Or, where should we be installing new lights? Things like that. Sometimes those plans will include active transport. Sometimes they'll break that out and have a special plan for active transport, like cycling, walking. Some cities are starting to get smart about things like e-bikes, which are neither fish nor fowl. They go in the bike lanes, but they drive the bikers insane, and then they pull into the car lanes and they drive the cars insane. How we deal with those as we go forward, and how we deal with electric scooters, how we deal with all of these new personal mobility options that are coming out is really critical. A lot of those options have a much lower footprint than the standard vehicle. And so we should be exploring them. We should be trying to find ways to bring them in. Cities have a lot of control over transportation within the city boundaries. And therefore, this is a place where it makes a lot of sense for cities to get involved, for municipalities to write a plan, because they can do something about it. They have power. And this is important because as we go down this list, there are other things that they have less power over. Infrastructure plans, same thing. Every city has a plan for their infrastructure. Some cities are getting very proactive about adding new capacity, or splitting their combined sewer systems and adding big catchment basins in order to be able to manage once-in-a-century stormfalls, which now seem to happen once every couple years. There are lots of cities that are trying to get ahead of this game in order to be able to manage what they anticipate are going to be the impacts of a changing climate. And there's a number of cities that have written up community energy plans. Over 170 at the last count that I've done. Somebody told me today that it was well over 200 now, but I haven't seen the list. Well over 50% of the Canadian population lives in a municipality or a town that has a community energy plan. And some of you may have taken part in putting together a community energy plan. Anybody do that? Anybody here? A few people? Anybody from Halifax? Because I'm going to rip on Halifax. No? Okay. So that's okay then. All right, so let's talk about a couple of community energy plans really quickly. This is Halifax, lovely view of the skyline. This is their population. They're growing at about 1% per year in terms of population, 0.9% per year. Their footprint looks something like this. I know that's a little bit hard to read, but it works out to be about 6.7 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. The data is old because their plan is old, and I don't have a breakdown for the city that comes later, but it's a large footprint, and it's a big municipality. It's 400,000 plus people living there, and it's a big kind of national center, national port. When you look at their community energy plan, they did one of the very first ones in this country. They worked with NRCan to help pull this together. In their original plan, they had 7 goals that were laid out, and each of these community energy plan goals had actions and timelines. It seemed really good. Like, if one of my students gave it to me, I'd say, B+. Many actions that were recommended were not within the power or authority of the municipality. That's why it's a B+. It lost momentum completely after the plan had been launched. And in fact, of those 170 odd communities, I would say well over 100, the community has pretty much lost interest after it's been done. It's like getting a new toy on Christmas. They were thrilled to get it, and then it went to the back shelf, and they never brought it out to play again. And you said, why did I buy that Nintendo Switch? Key lessons. They wanted to, or we think they should be reconsidering the inclusion of all these actions that go beyond the reach of the municipalities. How can you design a plan that says that somebody else will do something? That's like saying that my plan for clearing the snow in front of my house is that my neighbor will do it. You want to target municipal barriers to renewable power. This is one of the biggest things that came up, is that there are a lot of barriers in place that stop new projects coming forward. And setting clear economic objectives, so finding ways to incentivize participation in the plan. This is one of the big findings that we found from reviewing this. This is Guelph. This is Guelph. This is Guelph. Guelph has a much smaller population, but it's growing a little bit faster because it's in the GTA, and it's drawing in people from there. Much lower footprint, only about 1 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. Again, a little bit out of date, that data. Broken down, as you see here. They were focused on per capita energy use. So how much energy was were individual Guelphians, whatever you would say, using, and how would we get them to use more renewable power, more efficient energy use? They had a great stakeholder engagement process, probably because the University of Guelph is there, and they got right into it, rolled up their sleeves, did a lot of work. They set a great baseline, so they did a lot of data collection. This is one of the big things about community energy plans. You need lots of data to make them work. Without good data to tell you what your people are doing, how can you write a good plan? And many cities don't have good data yet. They didn't set any timelines, and they didn't really set how the different sectors were going to achieve their goals, which may be why they've had some problems. And they addressed the issues of leakage. And leakage is a big one, because for a city like Guelph, I would bet at least a third of the working population of Guelph works outside of the city of Guelph, if not more. It's a bedroom community, more and more, serving Toronto and Mississauga, the GTA. This is my city, Kingston, a lovely view out over the water. Lowest population, it says it's growing by 0.9% per year, but the latest census data came in, and actually, I think we grew by like 20 people over 5 years. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. We have emissions of about 1.5 million tons of CO2 equivalent. That's greater than Guelph. And it speaks to something that I'm going to bring up, which is the tricky part of analyzing all this data. Our emissions are dominated by our workplaces. Queens is the biggest emitter inside of the city because we're the biggest single employer. We have GHG reduction targets because this plan is the most recent of the 3 that I'm talking about. We want to hit those federal targets, the 15% and the 30% reductions. We're not going to hit 15 because that's, next year. Our actions are focused on reducing energy use and then addressing transportation. I guess we've done the short term, I don't know. We're starting to address the transport issues. We had really highlighted the need to integrate with all the other plans. Like every other municipality, we have too many plans. It's as though we're being paid by the stack of paper, the height of the stack of paper. So the more paper we put together, the more we're getting paid. We have a lot of plans in place, and there are big problems. Kingston's got a big problem in terms of aging infrastructure, particularly our building stock. It's really hard to beat some of our goals with the aging building stock that we have. So what are we taking away from this in our key lessons? I'm going to finish up really quickly here. I'm not going to read this data. I think that hopefully it'll be made available to you. You can read through all the numbers. But what you're going to see is that all the data looks different. Every municipality seems to look different. There can be some similarities. There can be some differences. Often it has to do with the way the data was collected. And without consistent data, it's really hard to see how these plans are going to work as part of a climate solution. A lot of the emissions have very little to do with the decisions that the city makes. You know, a city can say that we're going to put more buses on the street, but if they don't combine that with some other proactive measures, they'll have a very difficult time reducing emissions, particularly if you're a bedroom community and you're trying to feed people into other places. How are you going to reduce emissions in those cases? And we have a big problem with commercial or industrial emissions that really can't be addressed by municipalities, because a municipality is unlikely to say, we don't want this industry because it's a big emitter. How they work with the industry in order to help them reduce their footprints is a big challenge. And you know, if I had to tell Doug Ford one thing, I would tell him that if he's going to set up a fund to fund emission reductions, it should run through the municipalities, not through the provincial government, because municipalities can work with the winners and, you know, work with them to reduce that footprint on the site. It's all very site specific. So I'm going to stop there because I've probably already used my 10 minutes. But thanks very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much, Warren. That was very interesting. Good to know what's going on at the community level and have sort of a societal angle. So now I'll